Hi everyone, we've still got people trickling in, so thank you to everyone who managed to join us at 6:30 on the dot. Appreciate your punctuality. In the interest of getting our panelists through and having plenty of time for good discussion, I think we might kick off, and then anyone who joins a little bit later, we're still missing about 2/3 of our registrations. Anyone who joins a little bit later can catch up via the chat and our facilitated discussions. So again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Verity Morgan Schmidt. I'll be your host and facilitator for our panel discussions this evening. My husband and I run a beef property in Queensland's beautiful Mary Valley, which is where I'm joining you from tonight. So I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we're all joining, acknowledging that sovereignty was never ceded, and paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As I mentioned before, I'm joining you tonight from Gubbi Gubbi country, and I invite you all to just take a moment to pop the land you are joining from into the chat, hoping the technology will support that, and also just take a moment to reflect on what it means to be a custodian of the land for this fleeting moment in time. What does it mean to be good ancestors, good descendants, and how do we take these reflections forward into our daily lives, our policy decisions, and our economic choices? Critical questions that all of us must grapple with as we build a shared vision for a vibrant and prosperous Queensland, which is what this webinar series is all about. So thank you for taking the time to ponder some of these questions with us this evening. We've got an exciting panel lined up for you who are experts in their particular field, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. As mentioned, this is the first in Climate Council's new Queensland-focused webinar series, Smart Solutions to Supercharge the Sunshine State. Each month, we'll be taking a deep dive into exciting areas of the Queensland economy, unpacking the opportunities and challenges, and together with our magnificent speakers, building a shared understanding of how we move forward. These events will be promoted on the Climate Council's website and social media, so please stay tuned. We're looking forward to engaging with you. This evening, each speaker will present for 10 minutes before 5 minutes of facilitated discussion. We'll then wrap up with a 10-minute panel discussion. We invite you to pop your questions in the chat box as we go, respond to each other if possible, and keep a really positive dialogue flowing throughout, remembering that we're all learning on this journey. We recognise that everyone comes to this conversation from a different perspective. Some of you we know already work in government, some of you work in sustainability, and others are incredibly passionate about embracing the opportunities clean energy offers for Queensland's future. All perspectives are welcome. All questions are welcome. Standard Zoom courtesies do apply tonight. Please remain on mute, and if we set the tech up right, your video should hopefully be off. I also recognise that 6:30 is a difficult time for any parents amongst us, and a few of the panellists were laughing about this as we spoke. So please do feel free to attend to anything that requires your attention as we go through. Without any further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ella. Ella Worsbrodt is a researcher in climate solutions for the Climate Council and the lead author of Leaders and Legends, Thousands of Clean Jobs for Queenslanders, the 2020 State of Play, Renewable Energy Leaders and Losers, and the research lead for the co-authored Climate Council Alpha Beta Clean Jobs Plan. Previously, Ella has worked across the public, private and not-for-profit sectors, including as an analyst for consulting firm Alpha Beta Advisors, research officer at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the ANU, and as a national campaigner for the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. Ella will be joining us tonight to share her findings around the Leaders and Legends report and to really set the scene for Queensland as a clean industrial superpower. Ella, over to you. Are you ready to share?
Thanks, Verity. I will just share my screen. Sorry, bear with me, everyone. Are you able to see that, Verity? Great.
That is perfect, Ella. Thank you.
Great. So hi, everyone, and thanks, Verity. As Verity said, I will be giving an overview of the findings of the Leaders and Legends report that the Climate Council released last October, I think. There's a lot in the report, so I'm just going to sort of cover it all at a really high level, but if you're interested in more detail around any of this, it's all in the report, which is on our website, so I really encourage you to check it out. And of course, we have the Q&A as well. So some of the key findings of the report included that as Queensland rebuilds its economy from the COVID-19 crisis, this was written last October, it should seize the opportunity to create jobs in renewable energy and the industries it can power. We have seen some positive developments in this area from the Queensland government, which I will talk about a bit more later. But I think it's just really worth highlighting that Queensland is perfectly positioned to harness renewable energy for long-term job creation and economic growth because, as I'm sure you know, it has excellent solar and wind resources as well as a skilled industrial workforce, which means it's perfectly positioned to really lead in a lot of these new industries of the future. As I just said, on the basis of these resources, Queensland has the potential to be a clean industrial superpower. And that means that generations of Queenslanders could work in clean industries such as clean manufacturing, new economy mining and minerals processing, and renewable hydrogen. And this is largely because increasing renewable energy generation brings down power prices, which creates a global competitive advantage for Queensland in energy intensive industries like manufacturing. And in addition to this, Queensland already has a number of regional hubs that are really well placed to lead in these industries like Gladstone, Townsville, Mackay, places that already have a skilled workforce and established industrial infrastructure, which makes them ready to lead the charge in a lot of these clean industries. Oops, sorry. There we go. That's the one. So the report also looked at Copperstring 2.0, which is a proposed transmission project connecting Northwest Queensland to the national electricity market, which has the potential to unlock excellent wind and solar resources, as well as new opportunities in new economy, mining and minerals processing. And of course, it's really important to include in this discussion that renewable energy not only creates jobs, but it addresses long-term challenges like climate change. And we know that Queensland is one of the states that is most vulnerable to climate change in Australia. And, just in recent years, Queenslanders have faced a number of devastating extreme weather events made worse by climate change. And so it's really important that we're really accelerating win-win solutions like renewable energy. I'll give a very quick overview of renewable energy zones, or REZs, in Queensland. So basically a REZ is a region with excellent renewable energy resources where the development of those resources can be coordinated with transmission and demand. So basically that means that we're developing the electricity system as efficiently as possible and at least possible cost, and that we're making sure the electricity gets from where it's generated to all the places it needs to go, including cities and major industrial centres. Last year, the Clean Energy Council conducted some research and they found that renewables already employ over 6,000 people in Queensland, but this could increase to more than 11,000 jobs in just a few years with strong policy support. And that would include possibly up to 2,000 jobs in Far North Queensland and 2,000 jobs in the Darling Downs region. One of the great things about renewable energy zones is that they establish a long-term pipeline of construction, which means long-term construction jobs. And by 2035, the research showed that half of these jobs the Clean Energy Council identified could be in ongoing operations and maintenance roles. And as you can probably see from the slide, this is a great opportunity for the regions, with probably about 3/4 of the jobs created outside of Brisbane in regional Queensland. A little bit of an update on the current state of play in Queensland in terms of renewable energy zones. Sorry, I should have explained this on the previous slide, but the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide shows the 8 renewable energy zones that the Australian Energy Market Operator identified as the highest potential for development in Queensland. The Queensland government last year committed to investing $145 million to establish 3 REZ corridors. So that's one in the Darling Downs, one in central Queensland, which includes those REZs that go over Rockhampton, Gladstone and Bundaberg, and then one in northern Queensland, which includes all 5 of those REZs north of Rockhampton. It's a great first step from the Queensland government to have this initial commitment of funding. It would be great to get a little bit more information on exactly how this is going to be developed and what it will look like, but the government did hold an expression of interest process last year, which received overwhelming market interest. I think it was something like 200 expressions of interest to develop renewable energy projects in these regions, which is really exciting. to see the enthusiasm in this starting to take off in Queensland. The government also announced last year a $500 million renewable energy fund to help to accelerate the development of renewable energy projects in Queensland. The report also covered CopperString 2.0 and the Northwest Minerals Province. And again, sorry, I'll cover this at a very high level, but there's more information in the report. You probably have already heard about CopperString 2.0, but if not, it's a proposed transmission line that would run from Mount Isa to Townsville. And so that would connect Northwest Queensland to the national electricity market, which is Australia's largest electricity grid. It's an integrated grid that covers most of the population centres in the eastern states, as well as the major population centres in South Australia. CopperString offers a great potential opportunity because it would run through a region with excellent wind and solar resources. So it would create an opportunity to develop these resources and connect them to the grid. And that would lower power prices across the region. And that creates huge opportunities to develop more industries in that region, especially the Northwest Minerals Province. So the Northwest Minerals Province, again, you may be familiar, but is sort of centred around Mount Isa and Cloncurry, but it extends from the NT border to the Gulf of Carpentaria. And it holds some of the world's richest mineral deposits. And in particular, it holds an estimated $500 billion worth of new economy minerals. So this refers to metals and mineral elements that are required for advanced and emerging technologies like electric vehicles, consumer electronics, solar panels, wind turbines. So as you might expect, these are markets that are all growing, but they are set to boom in the future. So this is a huge opportunity for Queensland. And, CopperString 2.0 really unlocks that, could really unlock that opportunity because it reduces power prices across the region and really increases the competitiveness of these local industries. Of course, this is already an existing mining region in Queensland, and it just really ramps up the possibilities there and makes the whole region more competitive. Of course, it's really important to include that, while this does present a lot of opportunities, it's really important that all new economy minerals projects adhere, and all mining projects adhere to the best practices in responsible mining, and to really make sure that they minimise any environmental, health and social risks that, as we know, may be associated with projects like this. The report also included a significant section on the clean industrial opportunities that Queensland has ahead of it. As I said at the start, Queensland has a huge opportunity to lead in, really key clean industries of the future, like clean manufacturing, new economy mining and minerals processing, and renewable hydrogen. And these create opportunities both to be new major export industries, and also they have a lot of domestic advantages. I won't go into this in a lot of detail because this is going to be the subject of Ariane's presentation, but there's a lot more information on all of this in the report, and of course we can get into this in the Q&A. So we were asked to all finish with one key action that we'd encourage you to take as part of this webinar. And so one thing that it would be great to see is if you could email your MP, your state MP, with a copy of our Leaders and Legends report. The report's available on our website, and I've also put a link to it here because I think Verity is going to share these slides with you afterwards. And, ask your MP what they're doing to further position Queensland as a leader in renewable energy and industries such as clean manufacturing, mining, and minerals processing, and renewable hydrogen. And make sure they know that it's great to see some early movement in this area, but we want Queensland to lead in these clean industries of the future, and we really want the state to get on with it as quickly as possible. Thanks.
Perfect timing, Ella. That was fantastic and so good to hear a bit more of the detail around the opportunities that this presents. I think I'm always biased as a regional Queenslander, but when we start talking about how we can really diversify and support strong growth outside the metro areas, it's when it captures my attention. But just while we're waiting for some questions to come in, Ella, we've seen from your presentation that Queensland really does seem poised on the cusp of pretty enormous opportunities, and those Northwest Minerals Province figures always blow me away. What needs to happen within the next sort of 6 months to further unlock the development of the renewable energy zone potential?
Thanks, Verity. Yeah, as I said, we've seen some early commitments from the Queensland government. There was $145 million committed just prior to the election, and that's great to see. The Climate Council initially last year was asking for at least $300 million to really kickstart the development of renewable energy in Queensland. And so, we'd love to see the rest of that funding delivered, but, also just to see the government start laying out some really clear plans for how this is going to be developed, what the mechanisms are going to be, how it's going to be rolled out. We're starting to see other states, for example, New South Wales, giving quite clear plans about, where will be developed first, what the mechanism will be. And so, to make this real and to make sure that, Queensland gets on board quickly, it'd be great to see that sort of planning happening publicly, at least from the Queensland government.
And Ella, you mentioned that we're seeing this sort of planning from other states. Are there potential risks, or how is Queensland situated if we do delay our plans and our investment in this space?
I mean, there are huge, well, maybe not risks, but just lost opportunities. The faster Queensland moves on these things, the better it's going to be for everybody. As I said, renewable energy lowers power prices, it creates new competitive advantages. So it gives us a real opportunity to, seize those things as fast as possible and make sure that, Queensland and Australia is really positioning itself as a leader in some of these industries because, we do have the natural advantages, but we're also seeing, other countries see these opportunities too. And in many cases, they are moving to make them happen. And so we've got the natural advantages, but we need to go now to make sure that we lead. And, I think something else that you were alluding to in that question, Verity, is that, as I said, we have this interconnected electricity grid. And so, there are fantastic opportunities to really build out renewable energy in, for example, the Darling Downs region. But, we're also seeing the New South Wales government commit quite specific plan or commit plans anyway to developing a renewable energy zone in New England. And those have the potential to supply renewable energy to relatively similar demand centres, including Brisbane. And so, if Queensland wants to take hold of this opportunity soon, it needs to make sure that it acts on this as soon as possible.
Thanks so much, Ella. And Paul's just popped a question in. So Paul, hopefully I can get this right. I'm going to try to take you off mute if you'd like to ask your question to Ella. Okay, Paul, you should be able to ask your question now.
I can see an opportunity to unmute. Yes, read your report. So I'm just asking if you can indicate some priority or pilot opportunities, just to give us a little bit more detail. I was interested. I'm not familiar with the RES concept, or I am now, but I was intrigued by that the graphic that you showed us with all those resources dotted in. So, can you indicate any kind of pilots that are about to happen, or what you would consider, priority opportunities to make them real? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. So in the Australian Energy Market Operators report that identified those zones, they did identify 4 that they thought were highest priority for development, which included the Far North Queensland one, the Darling Downs, and then the 2 around central Queensland. The Queensland government hasn't been as clear about whether or not it's planning to develop those ones as the priority, or whether this renewable energy zone corridor concept means that it'll sort of be all of them developed together at the same time. But, you know, I think what's really important as well in this RES concept is that while these renewable energy resources are being developed, we're also at the same time building the necessary grid infrastructure like the transmission to make sure that this happens as seamlessly as possible and as cheaply as possible. And so that's why, yeah, it'd be great to see some clearer plans coming out from the Queensland government about, you know, how exactly they think this rollout's going to look.
Thanks so much, Ella. And I think we've got time. Bree's popped a question in as well. Bree, hold on, I'm going to let you talk too. And then we've got one from Esperance. So Bree, maybe if you do yours quickly, just noting that Ariane is also going to address the export potential.
Sure, yeah, Ella, I just wanted to know a bit more about Queensland's export potential. I know that's talked about in the report in terms of renewable energy, but maybe if you could touch on hydrogen as well, just to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is the subject of Ariane's presentation. So she can go into this in a lot more detail, but you know, renewable hydrogen is a really important climate solution and a really growing international industry because it presents a solution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from a whole lot of industries that are harder to decarbonize otherwise. So things like steel making and long range and heavy transport. Because Queensland has excellent renewable energy resources, it has real potential, and existing industrial infrastructure like ports and that kind of thing. It has real potential to be a leader in this industry, and especially in areas like Townsville and Gladstone. But I'll leave the details on that to Ariane.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Ella. We've got an extra question from Esperance, but Esperance, I might put your question to the panel discussion at the end, if that's okay. So I'll just store that one for now. Ella, a huge thank you for giving up your Wednesday evening to join us, and I look forward to hearing more from you when we get to the panel discussion at the end. It's now my absolute pleasure to invite our next speaker to prepare to start sharing his screen. So Andrew Bray is the founding national director of the RE Alliance, which was formerly the Australian Wind Alliance. RE Alliance is a community advocacy group for renewable energy with a focus on maximising outcomes for regional Australia from the renewable energy boom. Andrew has been working with local communities and with industry for over 7 years to increase social licence, improve community engagement, and develop innovative approaches to the delivery of community programs and funds. He has a background in community organising and has been an active advocate for stronger climate action for well over 10 years. Andrew, are you ready to share your screen? There we go. Beautiful. Over to you.
And I think I've unmuted as well, so we should be ready to go. Excellent. Thank you very much for that introduction, Verity, and for the opportunity to speak to this webinar. It is indeed a very interesting time for renewable energy right now, and the renewable energy zones in particular are a real opportunity for all the different states, but each in their own way. So, yeah, tonight we're looking at Queensland, obviously. So just quickly, look, RE Alliance was just kind of introduced there in that intro, so I won't spend too much time on it. But yeah, we're about 7 or 8 years old and have been working in the wind space for many years. And a lot of the issues that I'll be talking about in this presentation are ones that the wind industry has really led on, and now that we're working into renewable energy zones, we're looking to see solar, wind, solar storage projects, even transmission projects starting to look at these benefit sharing options as well. So that was really what drove our change from the Wind Alliance to RE Alliance. So I'll pop up this this slide again. You of course just saw it in Ella's presentation, and just note that while it does show you where the new wind, solar, and transmission projects will go, one thing it doesn't particularly mention is who the communities are in those different areas. So the community around Cairns, for instance, is a very different one from the farming community around the Darling Downs down in the south. So it's worth having a think of who are the people who will be living with all of this new renewable technology into the future, and what are the opportunities that they can get out of this move towards renewable energy that needs to happen for other reasons, but nevertheless opens up new opportunities for these communities. So I've grouped the community outcomes into 3 areas, and this sort of comes out of work that we've done in a report on called Building Stronger Communities that looks at the ways in which the wind industry has delivered benefits to local communities. So the first area is simply the way that these projects do business, and the main sort of point of contact between a community and a project is going to be, what are the jobs? You know, how is this going to set up our economic future? And is it a a net benefit for us? So being able to provide jobs, being able to provide training, so that you can skill up local people to take on what are sometimes skilled and semi-skilled jobs, and also local procurement issues. How do you drive the rest of the local community through construction, but also then during operation of these ones? And I should note that with the renewable energy zones, one of the possibilities that you now have is that when the government is coordinating rollout of these projects, they can actually start to, instead of having them all go in a sort of willy-nilly, depending on different companies' priorities, government can actually sequence the projects so that they roll out in some kind of order. And that means that you can then start saying, okay, we'll train up local people to be wind technicians or whatever it happens to be, and then move them from that project to another one in the region, and then on to the next one. So you avoid that boom bust thing, and you get a regular rollout of employment opportunities over a period of time. So benefits for the community in that way. The second group is not one that I actually want to spend a lot of time on, because I want to get onto the benefit sharing part of it. But it's sort of, how does business work in a way that's going to work for the local community? Downstream opportunities are things like the minerals, Northwest Minerals Province that Ella's already described. How does having cheaper power, help provide a flow on employment benefits? Local power innovations, sometimes distribution is, power is not quite as reliable in rural areas, as many of us know. So how can you improve the reliability and the price of power in rural areas where the reses roll out? I mean, you'd be a bit dumb, wouldn't it, to be in a local community, sort of 500k from Brisbane, and say, well, we're hosting a renewable energy zone, but the power still goes out, a dozen times a year because they haven't worked on the local lines. Community ownership is another option, which there are 3 wind projects, large scale ones in New South Wales and Victoria that have community ownership provisions. There's a local community own parts of these large scale ones. Some of you may have heard of Hepburn Wind in Victoria, which is a wholly community owned plant, but it's only a 2 turbine wind farm, whereas these ones are large scale ones and they've opened up community ownership. So that's another way in which community can involve themselves in the benefits of the projects. And in fact, I just talked about that slide without having put it up, but there you go. But the third area is in the sharing of benefits. And here we're looking at things like host payments, even payments to neighbours, and community funds. So community funds I'll get onto in a second. But these are ways in which, if you look at how a renewable energy project can relate to the local community, this is something that I think is a real opportunity for the renewable energy industry to embrace. So host and neighbour payments. In New South Wales, they have 5 renewable energy zones that they've mapped out. And across those 5, they expect payments to farmers hosting wind, solar and transmission assets to total $1.5 billion by 2040. So it's quite a big deal, and so you would expect to see similar numbers accrue in Queensland as well. And it's worth noting that when you pay money into local farmers' pockets, that money goes right around the local community, repeatedly. It's Ella will have probably the right terminology for this, but a farmer will, with money in his pocket, will purchase machinery from the local equipment supplier. They'll hire people to do their fencing, to look after their weeds. They'll be, looking after their vehicles and things like that. And that stuff pours into the local community. So it's really, really valuable. And increasingly, wind farm neighbours are also receiving payments. And so this is to get around the issue of, a neighbour may actually live closer to the turbines than the host, than their house is to the turbines as well. So, and they'll sometimes say, well, look, I have to see these things as well. How come you get all the money? I don't get any. And we've campaigned to see that differential, closed a bit. And to see wind farm neighbours start to receive payments. So that's increasingly happening in wind farm projects. I understand solar projects are starting to look at it too. So that's another way in which benefits can accrue. And we would like to see transmission projects sort of starting to think about this as well, which is not something that they're currently doing, but we are talking to them to that effect. So just on the community funds, at the moment, wind farms across Australia pay $5 million every year into local communities across the country for community projects. So that's a significant amount of money into what are often quite small towns. Anyone who lives in the country knows that the foundation of a lot of local towns is really volunteer involvement, people looking after the hall, after the local sports clubs, and those volunteer organisations can apply to these funds, the rural fire service brigades, those kind of ones, and money goes to them through sort of grant rounds, and that's pretty common. In fact, it's almost universal in new wind farm projects now. Solar storage and transmission projects are also looking at these kind of models. And I heard a statistic the other day that while 66% of wind farms have community funds, and most of the ones that don't would be older ones, only 12% of solar farms do. So a bit of catching up there to do for the solar industry. One example I'll point out, which is a Queensland example, is the Mount Emerald wind farm. Their fund's actually pretty generous by the standards. They pay $200,000 a year every year for the 25 years of that asset into community projects within 50 kilometres of the Atherton Tablelands where that wind farm is now operating. And it goes to projects like the Sustainable Garden at the Kyrie State School, Sustainable Garden, and those lovely young chaps getting a taste of gardening, which is a very lovely thing. But when we get into the RES context, and this is something we've paid a bit of attention to at Realliance, is that with a group of projects together in one potentially small region, you have a possibility to start coordinating those individual project community funds to target more substantial community outcomes. We're currently setting up a fund in Moyne, which is southwest Victoria, where there's a lot of wind farms, to put their take a number of wind farm community funds in the same region and to create a sort of umbrella that they can all feed into. And rather than having, you know, a grant round every 6 to 12 months and hand out small amounts of that money, you can start to be more strategic and say, what are the social needs in this region? Let's target them for, say, 3 to 5 years' time, and then we can, you know, work together with other funding streams to put some of that wind farm community money into it. So that's an opportunity that I think we'll start to see explored in the reses throughout the country, but certainly would be good for Queensland. Yes, there was an idea, you know, what can you do? Now you're armed with this great information. Verity, I think, will put up a link to this Building Stronger Communities report, which is the report that includes a lot of this information. Often for the city MPs, they have a bit of a sense that out there, you know, the country people don't really like the wind farms or the solar farms or whatever, and all they hear is the sort of, you know, stuff against it. There are a lot of benefits that accrue to them, and local communities will engage on on opportunities like this. So good to let MPs know. If you do live in one of the renewable energy zones, the message we've been putting out to people in the reses is, you know what your town and your region needs. How can hosting a renewable energy zone in that region open up opportunities to address some of those issues? So some of them will be through the community funding avenue. Other ones might be through, you know, the downstream opportunities of creating new employment. Other ones are around training. You know, people have a lot of ideas in the country, I can tell you, and most of them are good ones. So, you know, start tossing those ideas around. Be my suggestion. So anyway, that's all I want to say for now. So I'll hand back to Verity.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And just picking up on that theme of people in the country having fantastic ideas, I heard incredibly innovative solutions coming out of the school kids in Barcaldine in central Queensland recently, looking to host the world's first electric-powered motocross championship, which, you know, we talk about economic diversification. These are the kinds of innovative ideas that are out there in the bush if we can tap into the policy mechanisms and funding. Andrew, I'm just going to put another reminder for everyone. If you can't see the chat, you should have a button on the bottom of your screen, and might be more if your screen is minimized. Press on that and you should be able to bring up the chat function. Please pop any questions in there. I know that Danielle, you've put a question, so I'm just going to take you off mute and allow you to put that to Andrew. Ready? Okay,
thank you.
You should be all right now, Danielle.
Hi. Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for the presentation. Very insightful. I'm just wondering to what extent councils are involved in the RES model and its implementation.
Look, I couldn't answer specifically for Queensland because for a start, as Ella mentioned, their plans are not really as developed as they are in the other states. But certainly I know in New South Wales where they have really, they've kicked off with their first renewable energy zone in the Central West Orana region, which is sort of around the Dubbo area. And they're quite actively engaging councils there. It sort of varies a bit, you know. Sometimes the councils are engaged because they're getting a bit of stick about, you know, a particular project that, you know, some people might not be happy with. So that drives their interest. But, you know, the more proactive councils are recognising the opportunities there and getting involved. So I certainly would hope that the Queensland government is working with them on their RES plans.
Yep. And I'll just put a shameless plug in here for the Cities Power Partnership, which is part of the Climate Council, but does work with councils and local government areas right across Australia and is increasing their presence in Queensland. So if you live in an area that is likely to be affected by a RES, please do reach out to the team at CPP. because they'd love to hear from you and to know what resources are needed to support your council. Andy, thank you so much for your time tonight. I know you're an hour ahead of us and you've had to postpone someone's violin practice. So I do appreciate you making yourself available for this opportunity. It's been great to hear from you and hear that national example. So we might move to our final panelist for the evening, who's really going to take us to that big picture of what renewable energy can offer for Queensland as a whole, particularly as an export-focused state. So Ariane Wilkinson is an expert in environmental policy and regulation, having practiced as a lawyer for the last decade. Ariane's most recent legal work involved representing community groups across Australia and included advocating to promote clean energy laws. Before focusing on public interest work for community groups, Ariane held legal roles working for government and in corporate private practice working on major project approvals. Ariane has recently taken a lead role coordinating WWF's renewables and reef work in Queensland, and her presentation, as I said before, is going to look at those huge opportunities that renewable energy exports offer for Queensland, how renewable energy industrial precincts, so many acronyms tonight everyone, can unlock these opportunities and what this means for job creation and regional prosperity in Queensland. Ariane, I'll throw it to you to share your screen.
Thanks so much, Verity, and thanks for that lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being there. I'm going to share a presentation, so if you just bear with me for a moment. Have you got me with your share screen there?
No, we don't.
Okay. Excuse me, you all. While I'm in the fancy boardroom, to actually avoid my small child coming in and joining us in this presentation, I'm a bit new to using this particular share screen, so just give me a moment.
That's working now.
Thanks so much, Verity. Okay, thanks everybody. So as Verity said, I previously have been an environmental planning approval lawyer, done a lot of work in Queensland on both sides of the kind of development kind of issues, both working for developers but also working for communities and communities who don't want particular developments to go ahead. So I think what we're seeing here is a kind of clean energy boom that's going to happen in Queensland no matter what. And I think it's really great that we're having these early conversations so people can be ready for what's coming and have a lot of input into the planning process so we can get really strong benefit sharing with that great examples given by Andrew in his presentation. So WWF Australia has responded to, the kind of climate crisis that's been coming by and that we've seen in the bushfires and the kind of devastating high impact climate events, especially in Australia, by looking at a Regenerate Australia program. And part of that program is our Renewables Nation program, led by my colleague Nikki Eisen. So our key goal under that program is to accelerate Australia to become the world's leading exporter of renewable energy by 2030, and in the process switch to a low carbon future. So you might be thinking, okay, a lot of this conversation has started to be about our opportunities to rapidly reduce our domestic emissions. But the reality is that for jobs and prosperity, for Queenslanders, and Australians, and for responding to the kind of low carbon future that our trading partners are rapidly moving to, it's our view that we have to be rapidly looking at renewable exports. I think Ella gave a great kind of set of reasons why this is a really excellent opportunity for Queensland. We've got some of the best solar and wind in the country and globally, and we've got a skilled industrial workforce. So just a kind of quick overview in that slide there of what renewable exports are. I'm not going to go through all of them because they're pretty, it's quite a short one tonight, but I will speak specifically to the ones that are relevant to what we see are relevant to a renewable exports industry for Australia. That's renewable hydrogen, then solar power products and components of recycling for clean energy technologies. And sorry, I misspoke there. The three that we see as particularly relevant for the renewable energy industrial precincts, which is the specific policy as part of a renewable exports kind of program that I'll be talking about tonight. So WWF's work in this space has included releasing a number of policy papers, and they're all on our website under our Renewables Nation banner. And the Making Australia Renewables Export Powerhouse one on the left gives you our 4 key asks of both state and federal governments, what we see is needed from a policy perspective to unlock this opportunity for Australia. The first of those asks all state and territory governments to develop a costed renewable exports plan. And in terms of the detail of that and what that should look like, on the far right of your screen, you'll see our policy paper where we partnered with Beyond Zero Emissions. And we put forward this idea of the renewable energy industrial precincts. So we see these as absolutely key and something that's a key development that needs to occur in order to make Australia a renewable export powerhouse. What are they? There's our kind of summary with Beyond Zero Emissions of what we think they are, and I'll just read it for you. A cluster of manufacturers powered by 100% renewable energy, and so I guess the question is, where does that energy come from? Therefore, they've got to be located within or close to renewable energy zones and connected to renewable energy generation through high voltage transmission lines. They'll have access to clean heat and renewable hydrogen production, skills development, export infrastructure, good transport links. In the model that we've proposed, and we've been making submissions to the federal government with respect to budgeting as well, is that businesses within these precincts should be eligible for dedicated government support, including funding. Those who've been involved in the regulatory space for exports in Queensland over the years know that there always has to be incentives, both policy incentives, financial incentives to unlock industries and move them forward quickly. So what's the opportunity? There's a range of opportunities that arise from the supporting renewable energy industrial precincts in Queensland, but I've picked out what I see as some of the, the top 4, the really important ones. And for example, the third point down there, if Australia wants to be a global leader in zero carbon sustainable manufacturing, having these renewable energy industrial precincts is going to be a really important part of that. So what's happening is there already support for this kind of idea in Queensland? Well, we've certainly seen that, as Ella summarised really nicely, the policy support for the renewable energy zones, the great interest from industry, and there's been some funding into the development of those. I just picked out a few choice quotes from this was a media release that came out from Minister de Brenni in February 2021, and I think it's a really good example of how clear the Queensland government is on the opportunities here, and how there's a real focus on hoping that these renewable energy zones, as they're developed, can expand our manufacturing industry. So the renewable energy industrial precinct model that we've proposed in our paper, which you can download on our website, is the way that we say that will be able to happen. It's the way to actually unlock that. Something that's interesting to keep in mind when you're thinking about cleaning up our manufacturing sector and recovering from the kind of economic shocks that have arisen from the pandemic is this particular statistic from a survey last year. So, there's lots of good statistics showing that renewables and clean energy can be very popular in Australia, but keeping manufacturing onshore and improving manufacturing jobs is popular too. Verity, I'm not even looking at time, so you're welcome to wave me down if I'm going majorly over time.
You've got about 1 minute, Ariane.
Perfect. This is perfect. I think, yes, great. So what would this actually look like in Australia? Sorry, in Queensland in particular. In our particular paper, we've proposed Gladstone and Townsville as areas that we think are really ripe to be turned into renewable energy industrial precincts. Another good example though is Barcaldine, which I will admit I'm a Brisbaneite. I think I always pronounce it incorrectly, but Barcaldine, which has a really exciting energy hub proposal at the moment. And there's just a link to a good Queensland Country Life article about it, led by Ross Garno's company there. So I think the most important thing that we see is that it's connected to your port, your rail, you've got your existing technically skilled workforce, and that you've got the supporting infrastructure. So the kind of developments that are already happening in Gladstone and Townsville around, hydrogen and some of the work from Sun Metals in Townsville, I think show that those places are already ripe for this kind of development. And they're the two key areas that we're kind of proposing as ideal places for renewable energy industrial precincts in Queensland. There's a fair bit more detail in our paper if anybody wants to read it. It's really easy to get on our website. You just Google Renewables Nation WWF and you get all our papers down the bottom. Verity, you did ask us to have an action that people could take. I actually come empty-handed for that one, so I'm going to defer to Ella's excellent action. I think if anybody can email their MP with the Leaders and Legends report and ask what their MP is doing to make sure that Queensland takes up these opportunities, I think that's a great thing that we can do. Thank you.
Ariane, thank you for finding some time to join us tonight. That was fantastic. We've got a question straight up from Paul. I might just ask you to stop your screen share, Ariane, and we can invite Andrew and Ella to also start responding to these questions as well. Paul, I note your question in the chat and I will take you off mute in a second. I'm just going to take the facilitator's prerogative briefly because I did just want to get a sense. Ariane, you've spoken about that potential for renewable energy exports, Queensland as a superpower, etc. You've flagged Ross Garno's Sunshot out at Barcaldine at the end there. But what else are you seeing from the business community that indicates that they are really keen to pursue these opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Verity. It's a great question. I mean, part of it is the kind of net zero commitments we're getting from our trading partners, for example, Japan. So, there's just going to be that real desire for low carbon goods coming off Australia. So that's one of the key kind of opportunities that I see from businesses coming to Australia saying, what can we provide?
Perfect. Thank you.
Am I on? My question really is about how we're going to add value to this. I mean, a long time ago, a politician by the name of Barry Jones wrote a book called Sleeper's Wake, in which he deplored the fact that we added so little value to the commodities which we produced in abundance in this country. And reflecting on it, I wonder whether anything has changed. The renewable energy resources, of course, we have to develop them because it's the only way we're going to save the planet. And of course, it also gives us a great opportunity to benefit regional communities who don't happen to be sitting on top of a mineral or fossil fuel deposit. But it still concerns me that if we're going to ship out electricity directly or now in the form of hydrogen, that we're going to go down the same path, and namely that we simply won't develop the full value of what we have to offer. Anyway, very happy to hear anything you have to say on that.
Ella, I think that might be a great one for you to perhaps start on, because I know this conversation around capitalising on manufacturing opportunities based off that clean energy, etc., is certainly a conversation we've bounced around internally. So did you want to take the lead on responding to Paul, and then we might throw to Ariane as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question, Paul. So thanks for that. As you say, one of the classic problems has been that we don't do a lot of these value adding steps in Australia to, a lot of our resources. And that's one of the really big opportunities that you know, developing these renewable energy resources fast bring, because as I said, you know, it brings down our power prices significantly, and that creates a new competitive advantage for a lot of industries in Australia, because energy costs are one of the largest costs for most types of manufacturing. So if we can decrease those energy costs significantly, it suddenly makes us much more competitive on the global stage in manufacturing. And so, for example, Townsville has already been flagged as a high potential location for lithium-ion battery manufacturing, which are the batteries, you know, both that will be used in electric vehicles and also for battery storage, because, you know, it has that close proximity to where the minerals are mined, and also should be able to get low-cost electricity if we rapidly build out these renewables. And similarly, the Grattan Institute has done a report on the big opportunities for creating clean steel, manufacturing clean steel in Australia. So, you know, we export huge amounts of iron ore, but, you know, we could quite competitively use renewable energy to develop that into clean steel here in Australia. And the Grattan Institute identified Gladstone as one of the two highest potential locations in Australia for developing that value-adding industry. And so there are really great opportunities, and it's really great to see people thinking about those opportunities too. So yeah, it's a great question.
Thanks so much for that, Ella. Ariane, did you want to comment as well? We've got a few other questions to address as well.
Yeah, I think just backing in what Ella said, it's that, you know, we see it as the cheaper electricity that can keep some of those value adding onshore, and we've certainly proposed that as part of our briefing paper on renewable energy industrial precincts. I mean, it's not just kind of aluminium and hydrogen, but we would see these precincts as a home for companies making the clean technologies such as wind turbines, batteries, electrical vehicle chargers. It'd be, in our view, a space where all of that value adding was done onshore. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Ariane. And we've got a great question in the Q&A just in relation to Queensland being the site of, it's written as significant land use conflict with an engagement between agriculture, renewables and resources. Now, Andrew, I know this is an area that you're particularly passionate about, navigating that space between landholders and renewable energy companies. Did you want to comment on what your advice to Queensland government would be to ensure that this rollout goes smoothly and is a positive experience?
Yes, indeed. But I might also just chuck in just quickly, because I can't resist it. I'm old enough that I actually was set Sleeper's Wake in my year 12, so I did read that one. And Barry Jones is as right as ever now. But to look back even further, Lucky Country is really the reference here. And if we've got the opportunity to do all these things that Ariane and Ella are talking about, but it does require industry policy, and we've really got to, you know, step up in that regard, or we're not going to see these things happen. On the engagement part, Ellie's question was really around what's the role of engagement, or how important is it? The message is really it's to the government, but it's also to the developers as well. The solar developers, the wind developers, and even the Powerlink is going to need to build new transmission lines. They all need to be engaging early, often, and as transparently and as competently as they can, because your point is absolutely correct. There's a real potential for conflict between different land uses, but a lot of those issues can be sorted out. So, for instance, there's some community concern around solar locking up. Some people see it as locking up sort of prime agricultural land. It's important to realise that actually you can continue grazing on around a lot of solar farms. So you can actually, you know, agriculture and solar can coexist in that way. So those kind of, it's important that people understand that early, and those kind of messages are out there. For the government, it's really about setting some, as Ella was saying, be as clear as possible about how the RESs are going to roll out, and what are the criteria that the government wants to see. around engagement, around land use, around benefit sharing. The government has a real whip hand in this, and they can really drive good behaviour and require it of the developers who are essentially bidding to be part of these renewable energy zones. So I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrew. We are butting up hard on time, so I might just apologise to everyone whose questions haven't been answered and invite Howard very briefly to comment on some work that is unfolding in his local area of the Moreton Bay region. Howard, you've got about a minute if that's okay, perhaps less. Oops, Howard, have we got you? Oh, you should be off mute.
Yeah. Sorry. Well, it was a rehearsal anyway. You okay there? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
No, I've got 30 seconds left. Look, I run some sustainable business precincts in the Moreton Bay region, and one of them is one that's been identified as an innovation precinct, which is a light industrial area. I don't know about the interest in REIP stuff, but I'd be happy to talk with you guys about linking in with a regional council that's been totally renewed in the last 6 months. So they're very interested in clean manufacture. So there's a link there between the concepts of REIP, their clean manufacture sort of policy, which has only just been identified, and the precinct that I'm talking about, where there's some really warm to hot owners of businesses that I think would have an interest in this stuff. That'll do.
Thanks so much for that, Howard. And I think that's such a positive note to end on. And it really sums up some of the way that renewables have rolled out in Australia, doesn't it? You know, business and community have been leading the way. And so it's up to the role of government now to ensure that policy from here on out really facilitates an even more rapid rollout in a way that really does support these fantastic initiatives on the ground and benefits communities across the state. So finally, a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, and a big thank you to all of our attendees who managed to find some time on a Wednesday evening to join us. It is to me a stark reminder that we face both big opportunities and challenges in Queensland, but Howard's anecdote and story about what's happening in the Moreton region reminds me that Queensland is certainly up to that task. And we've got fantastic examples at Barkey, we've got fantastic examples of Gundawindi, there's amazing work happening up in Townsville, and it's good to hear Moreton Bay is moving ahead as well. So as this webinar closes, you should be automatically redirected to the Climate Council's Leaders and Legends report. As Ella has mentioned and Ariane has flagged as well, we do encourage you to have a read through, share the report and circulate it amongst your networks. And if you feel comfortable, we'd love for you to reach out to your local MP and ask what they are doing to ensure that Queensland is really able to capitalise on these opportunities. Now, finally, just a reminder that this is merely the first in Climate Council's Supercharging the Sunshine State webinar series, and we really look forward to this ongoing dialogue with each and every one of you. And we encourage you to let your friends, colleagues, networks, family know that this dialogue is happening. There's a lot of critical policy issues to explore. We're really excited to be able to start building our collective knowledge and understanding how we really make a bright and prosperous future for the Sunshine State. So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful Wednesday evening.